champagne glasses exploding across marble floors as two security guards drag a elegantly dressed black woman through the gilded halls of a Hamptons mansion. Her Chanel dress tears slightly as she's forcibly removed from what appears to be the social event of the season. The wealthy white guests watch in a mixture of shock and cruel satisfaction, their diamond jewelry glinting under crystal chandeliers as they whisper and point. They thought she was just another party crasher. What they didn't know was that she held their entire fortune in their hands. Fast forward 12 hours later. A mahogany boardroom table covered in contracts worth $5 billion. Papers being methodically torn in half, then quarters, then fed into an industrial shredder. Each ripped page represents millions, vanishing into thin air. The sound of destruction echoes through the empty corporate office as decades of negotiations crumble to dust. This is the story of how one night of cruelty cost the Richardson family everything they'd built over 3 generations. And if you think you know where this is heading, trust me, you have no idea how deep this rabbit hole goes. Now, let me introduce you to the woman at the center of this storm. Dr. Amara Williams, 45 years old, standing 5'6", with natural hair pulled back in an elegant bun that somehow managed to stay perfect even as she was being manhandled by security. But Amara's story doesn't start in boardrooms or Hamptons mansions. No, her journey began in the harsh concrete projects of Detroit, where gunshots were more common than good night stories. When Amara was just 16, a drunk driver ran a red light and took both her parents in an instant. Instead of crumbling under the weight of tragedy, this teenager stepped up and raised her 3 younger siblings while finishing high school with a perfect 4-point GPA. She worked double shifts at a local diner, her hands permanently stained with coffee and grease, just to keep food on the table and the lights on. But here's what made Amara different from everyone else in her situation. Every night, after her siblings were asleep and the dishes were done, she would sit at their rickety kitchen table with library books about business and finance. While other teenagers were posting on social media or hanging out at the mall, Amara was teaching herself about venture capital, market analysis, and investment strategies. By 25, she had earned a full scholarship to Harvard Business School. By 30, she had launched her first tech startup. By 35, she had sold that company for $200 million. And by 45, Dr. Amara Williams had built Green Future Capital into a $12 billion investment empire, specializing in renewable energy and sustainable technology. But here's the thing about Amara that would prove crucial to our story. Despite having more money than some small countries, she never forgot where she came from. She still wore her grandmother's simple pearl necklace to every major business deal, the same necklace her grandmother had worn while cleaning other people's houses to support her family. Amara was quiet, observant, and believed that actions spoke infinitely louder than words. Now let's meet the family who thought they could humiliate her without consequences. Charles Richardson III, 68 years old, with silver hair that had never known a bad day and hands that had never known real work. Charles inherited his oil fortune from his grandfather, who had struck black gold in Texas back in 1923. For 3 generations, the Richardson family had built their empire on fossil fuels, but now in 2024, their oil reserves were running dry and their stock prices were plummeting faster than their reputation. Charles had that particular type of arrogance that only comes with inherited wealth. He genuinely believed that the size of your bank account determined your worth as a human being. To him, money wasn't just a tool, it was a measuring stick for everything and everyone. His wife, Margaret Richardson, 65 years old, and a former Miss Texas who had never quite gotten over losing the Miss America crown in 1978. Margaret had spent the last 4 decades perfecting the art of maintaining appearances. Her face had been lifted, tucked, and injected so many times that her expressions had become as artificial as her smile. She lived in constant fear that someone might discover that beneath all the designer clothes and plastic surgery, she was just a small-town girl who had married her way into money. Then there's their daughter, Victoria Richardson, 42 years old and desperate to prove she belonged among European royalty. after marrying a minor Italian count who was more interested in her trust fund than her conversation. Victoria had that particular brand of insecurity that manifests as cruelty toward anyone she perceives as beneath her social status. She spent her days hosting charity events for causes she didn't understand and posting Instagram photos from places she visited but never truly experienced. And finally, Brandon Richardson, 38 years old, and the family's greatest disappointment, though they'd never say it out loud. Brandon had failed at every business venture he'd ever attempted, from a tech startup that never launched to a restaurant that closed within 6 months. He lived off his family's money while pretending to be an entrepreneur, and his bitterness toward successful people had fermented into genuine hatred. The setting for our story is the Richardson estate in the Hamptons, a 30,000 square foot monument to excess, complete with a private beach, tennis courts, and a wine cellar that cost more than most people's houses. On this particular evening in late September, they were hosting their annual charity gala for underprivileged youth. The irony, as you'll soon see, was intentional. Here's what you need to know about what was really happening behind the scenes of this glamorous charity event. Charles Richardson's oil empire was dying, and he knew it. His company, Richardson Energy, was hemorrhaging money as the world shifted toward renewable resources. They had exactly 18 months of operating capital left before bankruptcy became inevitable. But Charles had a plan. For 8 months, he had been courting Dr. Amara Williams and her Green Future Capital Fund. He needed her $5 billion investment to transition his dying oil company into a renewable energy powerhouse. It was literally the difference between saving his family's 3-generation legacy and watching it crumble into nothing. The meeting was scheduled for 9 p.m., right in the middle of the charity gala. Amara would slip away from the party, they'd finalize the deal in Charles's private study, and by morning, Richardson Energy would have the funding they needed to survive. What could possibly go wrong? Well, here's a question for you before we continue this incredible story. Have you ever been in a situation where people judged you based on your appearance before they knew anything about who you really were? Let me know in the comments below, because what happened next will make your blood boil. So there's Amara Williams, stepping out of a modest black Uber at the gates of the most exclusive estate in the Hamptons. Now, you might be wondering why a woman worth $12 billion is taking an Uber instead of arriving in style. Well, her Bentley was in the shop after a minor fender bender the week before, and Amara had always been practical about these things. She never felt the need to put on a show or prove her worth through material displays. But as she approached the mansion's entrance, her simple arrival choice was about to become the first strike against her in a night that would change everything. The security guard at the front gate, a burly man in his 50s with the kind of suspicious stare reserved for people he deemed out of place, immediately stepped forward with his clipboard. Despite Amara presenting her business meeting confirmation and explaining that she had a scheduled appointment with Charles Richardson himself, the guard's eyes narrowed with doubt. He made her wait while he called not 1, not 2, but 3 different people to verify her legitimacy, all while other guests in luxury vehicles were waved through without a second glance. Finally, cleared to enter, Amara walked through the grand foyer with its soaring ceilings and imported Italian marble. The party was in full swing, with nearly 200 of the wealthiest people on the East Coast mingling beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of artificial laughter. That's when Victoria Richardson spotted her. Victoria, draped in a dress that cost $30,000 and jewelry that could fund a small school, took one look at Amara and immediately jumped to the wrong conclusion. Without bothering to introduce herself or ask any questions, Victoria marched over with that particular stride of someone who believes they own everything they can see. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The catering staff entrance is around back, sweetheart." Let that sink in for a moment. Here was Dr. Amara Williams, a woman who controlled $12 billion in investment capital, being told to use the servants' entrance by someone who had never earned a dollar in her entire life. Amara's response was measured and professional. She explained that she was there for a business meeting with Mr. Richardson. But Victoria's reaction? She actually laughed out loud, a sharp, cutting sound that made several nearby guests turn their heads. Business meeting? With my father? I think there's been some confusion, dear. Now, Amara could have pulled out her phone and shown Victoria the email chains, the signed preliminary agreements, the months of correspondence that led to this moment. She could have name-dropped the board members she knew personally, or mentioned the deals she'd closed that week. But that wasn't Amara's style. She believed in letting her actions speak for themselves, even when that restraint was about to cost her dearly. Instead, Amara simply asked if Victoria could direct her to where she might find Charles Richardson. And that's when things went from bad to worse. Brandon Richardson, who had been eavesdropping from the bar while nursing his fourth whiskey of the evening, decided to insert himself into the situation. Brandon, remember, was the family failure, the man whose bitterness had curdled into genuine hatred for anyone more successful than himself. Let me guess, Brandon slurred slightly as he approached. Another charity case trying to network her way into our circle? Listen, lady, I don't know what sob story got you through the door, but this isn't the place for social climbing. The words hit Amara like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and if you knew what to look for, you might have noticed her fingers instinctively reaching for her grandmother's pearl necklace, the same gesture she'd made as a child when other kids at school mocked her second-hand clothes. But the night was just getting started. Margaret Richardson, having noticed the commotion from across the room, glided over with the grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of looking down on others. Margaret had radar for situations like this, moments where she could assert her superiority and remind everyone present of the social hierarchy she believed was divinely ordained. "I'm sorry," Margaret announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "But how exactly do these people get in? We have very strict security for a reason." These people. Those two words echoed through the immediate area like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations began to pause, heads turned, the whispering started. Amara found herself in the center of a growing circle of attention, but not the kind any reasonable person would want. She could feel the weight of dozens of stares, could hear the barely concealed murmurs of speculation and judgment. Some guests looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but none of them spoke up. In their world, social preservation trumped moral courage every single time. Through it all, Amara remained standing tall, her voice steady as she continued to explain that she had a legitimate business appointment. But with each passing moment, the situation was spiraling further out of control. What made this entire scene even more tragic was the irony that none of the Richardson family members understood. While they were busy humiliating and dismissing Amara, their entire financial future was hanging by a thread, and she was the only person who could save them. You see, behind the scenes of this glittering charity gala, Richardson Energy was dying a slow, painful death. The writing had been on the wall for years as the world shifted away from fossil fuels, but Charles Richardson had been too proud and too stubborn to adapt quickly enough. Their oil reserves in Texas were nearly depleted. Their offshore drilling operations were hemorrhaging money due to new environmental regulations, and their stock price had dropped 60% in just the past 2 years. Charles had spent sleepless nights staring at spreadsheets that all told the same story. Richardson Energy had maybe 18 months before bankruptcy became inevitable. The family fortune that had sustained 3 generations of luxury and excess was about to evaporate unless something dramatic changed. That something was Green Future Capital and the $5 billion renewable energy investment that Amara was prepared to offer. For 8 long months, Charles had been courting this deal, flying to meetings in New York, sending flowers and expensive gifts, doing everything he could to convince Amara that Richardson Energy was worth saving. The plan was simple: use Amara's capital to transition their existing infrastructure from oil extraction to renewable energy production. Solar farms, wind turbines, battery storage facilities, all of it built on land the Richardson family already owned. It wasn't just a bailout, It was a complete transformation that could make Richardson Energy more profitable than it had ever been. Charles had run the numbers 1,000 times. With Amara's investment, they wouldn't just survive, they would dominate the renewable energy market in the southeastern United States. The deal would create thousands of jobs, generate billions in revenue, and most importantly, secure the Richardson legacy for future generations. But here's what makes this story so incredible. While Charles was upstairs in his study, preparing contracts and rehearsing his final pitch for the most important business meeting of his life, his own family was downstairs, systematically destroying any chance that the deal would ever happen. Every insult Victoria hurled, every condescending remark Brandon made, every dismissive gesture from Margaret was another nail in the coffin of their family's financial future. They were literally insulting away their only chance at survival, and they had no idea they were doing it. If you're finding this as unbelievable as I am, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you absolutely speechless. Now, here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated poorly at a social event, and did you speak up or stay silent? Because what happened next will make you question everything about bystander responsibility. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What happened next will go down as one of the most shocking displays of cruelty and privilege I've ever encountered. And trust me, by the end of this segment, you'll understand why this story went viral and destroyed an entire family's reputation in a matter of hours. Victoria Richardson, apparently not satisfied with the damage she'd already inflicted, decided to escalate the situation to a level that would have been unthinkable to any decent human being. She grabbed Amara by the arm and physically led her toward the champagne fountain in the center of the ballroom, where the largest crowd of guests had gathered. A magnificent crystal fountain surrounded by the wealthiest people on the East Coast, all dressed in their finest attire, holding glasses of champagne that cost more per bottle than most people make in a week. And right in the center of this opulent display, Victoria Richardson was about to orchestrate a public humiliation that would haunt her family forever. Everyone, Victoria called out, her voice cutting through the classical music and polite conversation like a knife. I need your attention for just a moment. The crowd turned, expecting perhaps an announcement about the charity they were supposedly supporting, or maybe a toast to their generous donations. What they got instead was something far more sinister. It seems we have a party crasher among us, Victoria announced, gesturing dramatically toward Amara. This woman has somehow managed to slip past our security, and is now trying to take advantage of our generosity by claiming she belongs here. The crowd's reaction was immediate and telling. Some guests began to laugh, that cruel, tittering sound that wealthy people make when they witness someone else's misfortune. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing, their moral cowardice disguised as social etiquette. A few pulled out their phones, not to help, but to capture what they sensed might become viral content. Amara stood there, surrounded by nearly 50 of the most powerful people in America, and tried one more time to explain calmly that she had a scheduled business meeting with Charles Richardson. Her voice never wavered, her posture never slumped. But if you looked closely, you could see her fingers clutching her grandmother's pearls so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. That's when Brandon Richardson, emboldened by his sister's cruelty and his own liquid courage, pulled out his iPhone and started filming. This is incredible, Brandon slurred as he recorded, holding his phone high enough for everyone to see he was capturing the moment. Look at this. She actually thinks she belongs here. Hey everyone, get your phones out. This is going straight to social media. And they did. One by one, guests began pulling out their devices, turning Amara's humiliation into a spectacle worthy of the Roman Colosseum. Some were live streaming to their Instagram stories, others recording videos they planned to share in their private group chats later. The woman who controlled $12 billion in investment capital had become entertainment for people who had never worked a real day in their lives. But the worst was yet to come. Margaret Richardson, seeing that she was losing control of her perfectly orchestrated charity gala, decided to end the situation once and for all. With the imperious wave of someone who had never been told no in her entire life, she called out across the crowd. "Security! Remove this woman immediately. I don't know how she got in here, but this is completely unacceptable." Two large security guards, the same ones who had questioned Amara at the gate, began pushing through the crowd. You could see the uncertainty in their faces. They had checked Amara's credentials earlier and knew she had legitimate reasons to be there, but their paychecks came from the Richardson family. And in their world, money trumped truth every single time. As the guards approached, Amara made one final attempt to resolve the situation peacefully. Her voice was steady, professional, and dignified as she explained to the security guards that she had a scheduled business meeting with Mr. Charles Richardson regarding a renewable energy investment opportunity. That's when Victoria Richardson lost whatever was left of her composure. "Business meeting? With the help?" Victoria shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made several guests wince. "Father would never meet with someone like her. This is absolutely ridiculous." And then, as if summoned by his daughter's hysterical outburst, Charles Richardson himself appeared at the top of the grand staircase. This was the moment. The crucial, defining moment that would determine not just the fate of a $5 billion business deal, but the moral character of a man who had spent 8 months convincing Amara that he was someone worth doing business with. Charles looked down at the scene below. His daughter Victoria, red-faced with rage, his son Brandon swaying drunkenly while filming with his phone, his wife Margaret directing security guards like she was conducting an orchestra of cruelty, and in the center of it all stood Dr. Amara Williams, the woman who held his family's financial future in her hands, being treated like a common criminal. For just a moment, Charles Richardson's face showed recognition. His eyes widened slightly as he realized who was being humiliated in his ballroom. This was his moment to step up, to clarify the situation, to show some basic human decency, and protect the woman who was about to save his family's legacy. Instead, Charles Richardson chose cowardice. Rather than defending Amara or explaining to his family and guests that they were witnessing the abuse of one of the most powerful investors in America, Charles simply froze. You could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The social embarrassment of admitting his mistake versus the business necessity of protecting his deal. And then he spoke the words that would cost his family everything. "Perhaps there's been some confusion here," Charles said, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent ballroom. "We should probably reschedule whatever this is about." Those words hit Amara harder than every insult, every cruel laugh, every moment of humiliation that had come before. Because this wasn't just about being mistreated by strangers, this was betrayal by someone she had trusted, someone she had spent months working with, someone who knew exactly who she was and chose to throw her to the wolves to save his own social standing. For the first time all evening, Amara's composure cracked, not with anger or tears, but with something far more dangerous: complete disappointment in human nature. The security guards, taking Charles's words as permission to proceed, moved to escort Amara from the premises. As they flanked her on either side, preparing to walk her to the exit, Brandon Richardson decided to add one final insult to the evening's cruelty. "Don't come back unless you're serving drinks," he shouted, his phone still recording as he captured what he thought was his moment of social media glory. Victoria, not to be outdone by her brother, added her own parting shot. "Some people never learn their place." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause, as if they had just witnessed some brilliant performance rather than the systematic destruction of a human being's dignity. But as the security guards began to escort Amara toward the exit, something extraordinary happened. Just as they reached the massive oak doors that led out of the Richardson mansion, Amara stopped walking. She turned around slowly, deliberately, and looked back at the crowd of people who had just participated in her humiliation. Her eyes swept across the faces of Victoria and Brandon, still grinning with their phones out. She looked at Margaret, who was already turning away to resume her party as if nothing had happened. And finally, her gaze settled on Charles Richardson, still standing at the top of the staircase like some kind of cowardly king surveying his domain. If you had been there in that moment, you would have seen something shift in Amara's expression. The hurt and disappointment were still there, but they were being replaced by something else entirely. Cold, calculated determination. The look of someone who had just realized exactly what they needed to do. Amara reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. If you think you know what's coming next, hit that subscribe button, because what Amara is about to do will shock you to your core and prove that sometimes justice comes in the most unexpected ways. Now I have to ask you something. What would you have done in Amara's situation? Would you have tried to fight back in the moment? Or would you have walked away with dignity and planned your response? Let me know in the comments, because Amara's next move is going to redefine what it means to have the last laugh. The Uber ride away from the Richardson estate was silent, except for the sound of Amara's fingers moving across her phone screen. The driver, sensing the tension radiating from his passenger, didn't attempt small talk. He had no idea he was witnessing one of the most expensive phone calls in business history. Amara's first call was to her personal assistant, Sarah, who had been with Green Future Capital since the beginning and knew every detail of every deal they had in progress. "Sarah, it's me," Amara said, her voice eerily calm. "I need you to cancel the Richardson contract. All of it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was filled with disbelief. "Ma'am, that's $5 billion we're talking about. Are you absolutely certain? This deal has been 8 months in the making." Amara's response was as cold as winter steel. "I know exactly what it's worth, and so do they. Should I ask why, or do you need me to just execute the cancellation?" "Execute it immediately. Send the formal notice to their business development team, their legal department, and Charles Richardson personally." "And Sarah?" "Make sure the cancellation is effective immediately. No grace period, no opportunity to renegotiate. It's over." While Amara was systematically dismantling their financial future with a few phone calls, the Richardson family was still inside their mansion, celebrating what they believed was their successful humiliation of an unwanted intruder. Brandon was in his element, uploading the videos he'd taken to his Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter accounts. He added laughing face emojis to each post, along with captions like, "When party crashers get what they deserve," and "Some people really don't know their place." He was so proud of his content that he was personally responding to early comments, encouraging his followers to share the videos and make them go viral. Victoria was holding court near the champagne fountain, regaling a group of guests with an exaggerated retelling of the evening's events. She was painting herself as the hero of the story, the vigilant hostess who protected her family's charity gala from exploitation by opportunistic outsiders. Margaret had already moved on entirely, directing the catering staff to serve the dessert course and reminding everyone about the silent auction that was the supposed focus of the evening. In her mind, she had handled a minor disruption with the efficiency and grace befitting someone of her social standing. Charles, meanwhile, had returned to his study to review the renewable energy contracts one final time before his scheduled meeting with Amara. He was still expecting her to return once the confusion had been sorted out. After all, $5 billion was $5 billion, and surely a little social misunderstanding wouldn't derail such an important business opportunity. That's when his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was David Martinez, his head of business development, the man responsible for coordinating all of Richardson Energy's major deals. "Charles, I'm sorry to call so late, but I just received something that doesn't make any sense," David said, his voice tight with confusion. "I just got a formal cancellation notice from Green Future Capital. They're pulling out of the renewable energy deal, all of it, effective immediately." Charles Richardson felt the blood drain from his face. His hand gripped the phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and for a moment he couldn't find his voice. "That's impossible," he finally managed to say. "There must be some mistake. I just spoke with Dr. Williams this afternoon. We were supposed to finalize everything tonight." "Sir, this isn't a mistake. The cancellation notice is signed by Dr. Amara Williams herself, and it specifically states that Green Future Capital is terminating all negotiations with Richardson Energy due to fundamental incompatibilities in corporate values and leadership principles. The phone nearly slipped from Charles's hand. Corporate values and leadership principles. Those weren't generic business terms. They were a direct condemnation of what had just happened in his ballroom. David, I need you to get Dr. Williams on the phone immediately. There's been a misunderstanding that I need to clear up. I've already tried, sir. Her assistant says she's not taking any calls from anyone associated with Richardson Energy, and that the decision is final and non-negotiable. Charles ended the call and immediately tried Amara's direct line himself. It went straight to voicemail. He tried her office number. Same result. He tried her assistant. The line was busy. In desperation, he even tried calling her emergency contact number, only to discover that it had been disconnected. Dr. Amara Williams had effectively vanished, taking $5 billion and his family's entire future with her. Down in the ballroom, Victoria noticed her father's absence and went looking for him. She found him in his study, frantically trying to reach various business contacts, his face ashen and his hands shaking. "Daddy, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Charles looked up at his daughter, and for the first time in her life, Victoria saw genuine fear in her father's eyes. "Victoria, I need you to tell me exactly what happened with that woman tonight. Every detail." "What woman? Oh, you mean the party crasher? Daddy, don't worry about her. We handled it perfectly. She won't be bothering us again." "Victoria, that woman was Dr. Amara Williams." Victoria stared at her father blankly. The name meant nothing to her. "She's the head of Green Future Capital. She was here tonight for our renewable energy deal, the $5 billion deal that was supposed to save our company." Victoria's mouth fell open. "That woman? The one we had thrown out? That's impossible, Daddy. She was dressed like. She came in an Uber." Margaret, having noticed the commotion, joined them in the study. "What's all this about? Why do you both look so serious?" Charles turned to his wife with an expression of pure devastation. "The woman we just humiliated and threw out of our house was Dr. Amara Williams. She controls $12 billion in investment capital, and she was here to give us $5 billion of it." Was Margaret, past tense. Margaret's perfectly composed facade cracked for the first time in decades. "That's not possible. That woman was clearly, she was obviously what, Mother?" The voice came from the doorway, where Brandon had just appeared, still riding high from his social media success. "She was obviously what? Black? Poor? Unworthy of being in our house?" The truth of his own words hit Brandon like a physical blow, and his smug expression began to fade. "Brandon, please tell me you didn't post anything about tonight on social media," Charles said, though the sinking feeling in his stomach already knew the answer. I posted the videos on all my accounts. They're already getting thousands of views and shares. People think it's hilarious how we handled that party crasher." Charles closed his eyes and sank into his chair. In one night, his family had managed to destroy not just a $5 billion business deal, but potentially their entire reputation as well. And he was right to be worried, because while the Richardson family was slowly realizing the magnitude of their mistake, something else was happening on social media that would make their financial losses seem insignificant compared to what was coming next. Brandon's videos were indeed going viral, but not for the reasons he had hoped. Instead of people laughing at Amara's humiliation, the comment sections were filling up with outrage and condemnation. "This is absolutely disgusting behavior from these entitled rich people. How can they treat another human being like this at a charity event? Someone needs to find out who this woman is and make sure she's okay. This is why people hate the wealthy elite. No basic human decency." Within 3 hours of Brandon posting the videos, they had been shared over 50,000 times, but not as comedy content. They were being shared as examples of everything wrong with wealth inequality and social privilege in America. News outlets began picking up the story. First, it was just gossip blogs and social media news accounts. But by midnight, major news organizations were running with headlines like "Billionaire Family's Racist Meltdown Costs Them Everything," and "The $5 billion Mistake, How Prejudice Destroyed an Oil Dynasty." If you think this story couldn't get any crazier, make sure you're subscribed, because What happens in the next 24 hours will completely blow your mind and prove that in the age of social media, actions really do have consequences. Here's what I want to know. Have you ever seen someone's social media post completely backfire on them? Because what the Richardson family is about to experience is the definition of instant karma. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and get ready for the most satisfying conclusion you've ever heard. At exactly midnight, Charles Richardson III was sitting in his Bentley outside the glass towers of Manhattan's financial district, staring up at the 42nd floor where Green Future Capital's offices occupied an entire level. The building's lobby was empty, except for a single security guard, and Charles knew that his only chance of saving his family's legacy was somewhere in the darkness above him. He had never begged for anything in his entire life. 3 generations of inherited wealth had insulated him from ever having to humble himself before another human being. But as he sat in that car, watching his breath fog the windows in the October chill, Charles Richardson realized that his pride was about to cost him everything he had ever known. The security guard, a patient man named Miguel who had worked the night shift for 15 years, watched with growing concern as this well-dressed elderly man paced the marble lobby hour after hour. Charles had explained his situation, pleading to be allowed upstairs, but Miguel's instructions were clear. No visitors to the 42nd floor without prior authorization, especially not anyone associated with Richardson Energy. As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Charles was still there. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled, and his eyes red from lack of sleep. He looked like a broken man, which, in every way that mattered, he was. At 8:30 in the morning, as early employees began filtering into the building, Charles finally saw her. Dr. Amara Williams stepped out of the elevator, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, looking as composed and professional as ever. When she saw Charles sitting in the lobby, her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. After a brief conversation with Miguel, Amara approached Charles with the measured steps of someone who held all the power in the room. "Mr. Richardson," she said simply, "I understand you've been here all night." Charles struggled to his feet, his legs stiff from hours of sitting on uncomfortable lobby furniture. "Dr. Williams, thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve it after what happened last night, but I need to explain." "You have 10 minutes," Amara interrupted. "My office." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was the longest 60 seconds of Charles Richardson's life. When the doors opened, he was greeted by the sight of Green Future Capital's headquarters, sleek, modern, and humming with the energy of a company that controlled billions of dollars in investments. Photos on the walls showed renewable energy projects around the world, each one representing jobs created and communities transformed. In Amara's corner office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, Charles Richardson began the most important conversation of his life with the most pathetic performance of his career. "Dr. Williams, what happened last night was a terrible misunderstanding. My family had no idea who you were. If they had known—" "Stop." Amara's voice was calm but absolute. "You're going to blame your family for your own moral failure?" Charles tried a different approach. "The videos, the social media posts, they don't represent who we really are. We're good people who made a mistake in a moment of confusion." Amara walked to her window and looked out at the city below. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen enough of the world to understand exactly what she was dealing with. "Mr. Richardson, last night you showed me exactly who you are when it matters most. Not who you pretend to be in business meetings or charity galas, but who you really are when you think nobody important is watching." "My family didn't know." Charles began again. "Your family didn't know," Amara repeated, turning back to face him. "But you knew. You've known who I was for 8 months. You've sat across from me in conference rooms, shared meals with me, courted my investment, and built what I thought was a professional relationship based on mutual respect. And when it mattered, when I needed you to show basic human decency, you chose silence." The words hit Charles like physical blows. He opened his mouth to argue, to explain, to somehow justify his cowardice, but nothing came out. You want to know what hurt the most? Amara continued. It wasn't your daughter's cruelty, or your son's mockery, or your wife's bigotry. It was watching you, someone who knew better, someone who understood exactly what was happening. Choose your social comfort over doing what was right. Charles Richardson, a man who had commanded respect and deference for nearly 7 decades, found himself with nothing to say. The investment is over, Mr. Richardson. Green Future Capital will be redirecting our $5 billion to your competitors. Clean Energy Solutions has been very receptive to our renewable energy initiatives. The mention of Clean Energy Solutions hit Charles like a sledgehammer. They were Richardson Energy's primary competitor, the company that had been trying to acquire Richardson's infrastructure for years at bargain basement prices. Dr. Williams, please. You'll be destroying more than just my company. We have thousands of employees their families depend on. Those employees will be just fine, Amara said with a slight smile. Clean Energy Solutions has already committed to retaining all Richardson Energy personnel when they acquire your assets. In fact, they'll be getting significant raises and better benefits. The only people who won't land on their feet are the ones who deserve exactly what they're getting. Charles left that office knowing his world was over. By the time he reached the lobby, the first news alerts were already hitting his phone. Richardson Energy's stock price had opened the morning down 30% and was falling fast. What happened next was like watching dominoes fall in perfect, devastating sequence. By noon, Richardson Energy's stock had plummeted 60%, wiping out billions in market value. The company's board of directors called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Charles as CEO and begin immediate liquidation proceedings. The Hamptons estate, mortgaged to the hilt to support their lavish lifestyle, went to foreclosure within a week. The 30,000-square-foot monument to excess was sold at auction to a tech entrepreneur who immediately announced plans to turn it into a retreat center for underprivileged youth. The irony was not lost on anyone. Victoria Richardson's perfect marriage crumbled just as quickly. Her Italian count husband, realizing that his wife's trust fund was about to disappear, filed for divorce and moved swiftly to secure his share of their European assets before the Richardson family's creditors could freeze them. Brandon Richardson watched his various failed business ventures collapse entirely when his family's financial backing evaporated. The restaurants, the tech startups, the real estate investments, all of it built on borrowed money that was now being called in by very impatient lenders. But while the Richardson family's world was crumbling, something beautiful was being built with the money that should have been theirs. 6 months later, Dr. Amara Williams stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony in rural Georgia, surrounded by 5,000 new employees of the largest renewable energy facility in the southeastern United States. Former Richardson Energy workers, now earning 40% more than they had before, operated wind turbines and solar installations that powered 500,000 homes with clean energy. The news cameras captured everything. The gleaming solar panels stretching to the horizon, the massive wind turbines turning gracefully in the breeze, and the faces of workers who had thought they were going to lose their jobs, but instead found themselves part of something revolutionary. In the background of one news shot, barely visible among the crowd of onlookers, stood Charles Richardson. He looked older, smaller somehow, wearing a simple suit instead of his usual custom tailoring. He was no longer the oil dynasty patriarch who had commanded respect through inherited wealth. He was just an old man, watching the future being built with money that his own prejudice had cost him. When the news reporter asked Dr. Williams about her rapid expansion into the southeastern market, her answer became the most quoted statement of the year. "Respect isn't something you can buy," she said, looking directly into the camera with the confidence of someone who had earned every dollar she controlled. "It's something you earn through how you treat others when you think nobody important is watching. Character is the only currency that truly matters in this world, and it's the one thing that money can't buy." If this story has shown you anything about the power of treating people with dignity, regardless of their perceived status, Make sure to subscribe for more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in justice. The Richardson family learned that in a world where information travels at light speed and social media can make anyone famous for all the wrong reasons, character is the only currency that truly matters. They discovered that sometimes the person you dismiss as unworthy might just be the one holding your entire future in their hands. And perhaps most importantly, they learned that in an age where every cruel act can be recorded, shared, and judged by millions, there's nowhere to hide from the consequences of treating another human being as less than they are. The woman they threw out of their house didn't just take her $5 billion with her. She took their reputation, their legacy, and their future, leaving behind only the memory of one night when their true character was revealed for the whole world to see. Sometimes, justice isn't delivered by courts or governments or karma. Sometimes it's delivered by a quiet woman in a modest who remembers where she came from and refuses to let anyone make her forget her worth. What would you have done if you had been a guest at that party and witnessed Amara being treated that way? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed silent like everyone else? Let me know in the comments. Because the answer to that question says everything about who you really are when it matters most.